Hi, my name is Ricardo, and in this video I want to talk about governing through a time of crisis. Now, years ago I attended a conference and one of the presentations was made by the American Red Cross Society, and they basically explained how they would prepare for a disaster, for a time of crisis. And I thought, the level of preparedness was so impressive. So I looked at their website and I found this particular statement that I think sets the tone for this video. Now this video is inspired by an air crash investigation report that was conducted by the Transportation Board in Canada. And this was after an airplane crashed when it was busy approaching the airport. Unfortunately, it started the descent too late, and that increased the workload on the pilot, and it also decreased the capacity of crew members to deal with this particular situation. And unfortunately, the plane crashed, and the theme of this report was how to deal with navigational issues at a critical phase, the time when the plane was landing. And I think that concept is so important for us. So I've identified 6 concepts in this report that I think are so important and where we can learn lessons, in terms of navigating or dealing with these navigational issues during a critical phase in our history. And I hope that you will find these lessons quite helpful. It's also aligned to the word crisis. So the first concept is context. Now, within the aviation industry, there's a concept called situational awareness. And it basically means that, the crew members, they have to extract information from the external environment and integrate that information with their own knowledge in order to get a coherent picture of what is happening. And that should enable them to anticipate potential future events. I thought that's quite an interesting and remarkable definition. So basically, extracting information from the external environment, integrating that with our personal knowledge, and that gives us a fairly comprehensive picture of what's happening. But then we also have to anticipate potential future events. And I thought that's exactly what board members should be doing. There's one item I would like to add to this, and that is the request by King Solomon when he asked the Lord, he said, "Give me wisdom to govern and to lead your people, for who is able to lead this great people of yours?" And he said, "And teach me to distinguish between right and wrong." And I thought, if I add that prayer to this concept, it is divine situational awareness. So that's the first concept that we get out of the aviation industry. The second concept is resources. Now, they've got this concept called crew resource management, and I've spoken about it in one of the previous videos. And so the whole idea is that when you're on a flight, you should use all resources at your disposal. And that includes the human resources, technical resources, the aircraft, environmental resources, and also your intellectual capacity in order to navigate the flight to ensure the safety of those on board. Now, I think that's a marvelous concept for non-profit organizations also to learn. And the idea is that we use all the resources at our disposal in a time of a crisis. So that would mean, financial resources, technology, human resources, our relationships. And sometimes, even when financial resources might be low, I think there's an immense wealth of resources within our organizations where we can mobilize and be innovative beyond what's in our bank accounts. And I think that's the time when we have to really muster our abilities and our innate gifts that we have in order to to navigate through a disaster. So crew resource management, very important concept. Then thirdly, it's what's called shared situational awareness. And that is, in my mind, interaction. So what they're saying is that it's important to have situational awareness, but when you're on a flight and there are multiple crew members, it's not sufficient for an individual to have shared situational awareness. All of those on board must have situational awareness, and that situational awareness must be shared amongst the crew members in order for proper coordination to take place. It doesn't matter, it's not as important for one person to have that awareness, but for all of them to have the awareness. So the idea is for all crew members to be on one page. And I think that's so significant. That means interaction at a board level. We need to interact with our fellow board members, with the staff members, with the beneficiaries, with the stakeholders. That will enable us to have that shared situational awareness. S for safety management, an important concept within the aviation industry. So the whole idea about crew resource management is to ensure the safety of those on board. And the aviation industry has adopted a safety management system for flights and for air travel. So within organizations, the safety of those within the organization, the staff members, the volunteers, the beneficiaries, it's so important within a time of a crisis. So the organization must adopt appropriate safety management systems and protocols to ensure that, whatever crisis you're facing, that there's safety is a priority for those involved within the organization. So the next concept is crew incapacitation, which I find particularly interesting. So the idea is that you could have a crew member who's obviously incapacitated or subtly incapacitated. Now, the last one is especially problematic because imagine you have somebody who's in control but actually incapacitated. And that means that if it's the pilot needs to be removed because the pilot is no longer in control. Now, within non-profit organizations, unfortunately, sometimes we find people who are in control, but they are incapacitated in a subtle manner. And that shouldn't happen within the context of a crisis. The board should be so aware and vigilant to ensure that there's no self-inflicted incapacitation during a time of crisis. That should be avoided by all means. We need all hands on deck in the event of a crisis, and we should be intolerant when it comes to crew incapacitation. The last concept is storytelling. Now, in aviation terms, it's referred to as incident reporting. So essentially, like with the big commercial aircrafts, there's the black box, and that records critical data in terms of the flight. But that's not really what I'm talking about. The black box reports certain events, but if there's a crisis, it doesn't report the trauma and the emotional experience of the passengers on board. That's not, what the black box is doing. There's the concept of incident reporting. That's a wider form of reporting in terms of what's happening during a flight. And within a non-profit organization, that's what I want to focus on. Now, the black box is sort of the equivalent of a formal reporting mechanism like the annual report or the integrated report. But I'm talking in this context about storytelling. It's a broader form of reporting in terms of the experiences of those involved with the organization. I think that is so important in a time of a crisis. Now, just before this pandemic started, I was so intrigued by a disaster that happened in South Africa, the Laingsburg floods. And, I've done a bit of reading on this, and one of the interesting theses that I came across was written by Ashrik Peterson. And he set out to provide a more comprehensive report in terms of what happened at that particular disaster. But one of the statements he made in his thesis was that he said for more than 2 decades, a very one-sided account was given of the Laingsburg floods. And that was, in my view, so heartbreaking and unfortunate because, 2021 in January will mark the 40th anniversary of the Laingsburg floods. And to think about it, that for more than half of that period, a one-sided account of this disaster was recorded. And I think, within our organizations, we should avoid at all costs that, that scenario plays out. And we should be vigilant in providing a platform, for those that are affected by the disaster, by the crisis, for them to actually give expression to their emotions, their experience, so that there's a more comprehensive account of what actually occurred throughout the crisis. And the idea is that others that will come maybe years later, that they will be able to learn some of the lessons that an organization has experienced during a time of a crisis. Now, unfortunately, the reality is that some organizations will not survive this particular crisis. And some organizations have already closed down, or they're in the process of closing down. That's very unfortunate. But one of the things that is important during this time is to ensure that your legacy is captured, that the organization's memory is beyond this particular period, the good work that the organization has done. Make sure that those are captured, that the story will be told in future about the organization. Things won't stop, at this level. I've been part of an organization that closed down many years, but the reality is what the organization has done, its interventions were beyond that particular period, and it lives through us, as individuals. So even though the organization might close down, hopefully that doesn't happen in your context, but even if it happens, you know that you're part of the legacy of the organization, and it will continue through you. And especially now, make sure that what's being done, what's happening throughout this crisis, that it gets recorded effectively, accurately, and more comprehensively. I hope you've liked this video. If you like it, please click the like button. Please share it with others if you think it would be helpful. And thank you for having watched this.